If any of your friends ever ask you to help them replace the drive belt on their old lowrider, just say no. Hey guys, so welcome back to the channel. I know some of you guys who've been watching my channel for a while, you'll recognize this bike behind me. This is a 1988 Harley Davidson. This is a lowrider, one of the dyno models that Harley put out. It's a great bike. I went through it, got it running for the guy. He loved it. And he's kind of a hot rodder though, so he was getting after it a little bit and he blew the drive belt. He was out doing burnouts and other such nonsense. So anyway, it's kind of a bugger to change the drive belt on one of these things. So on most Harley models like the Softails and the FLHs, the touring chassis, most of the swing arms go and bolt to the frame and the transmission and engine are separate. On this unit, the swing arm is bolted through the transmission and the transmission is bolted to the frame, and then the engine is connected to the transmission. It's kind of an odd design, but it makes changing the drive belt that much harder. I'll show you what I mean. This is how the drive belt broke. More or less just sheared. It's interesting how drive belts break. I've replaced a lot of drive belts over the years, and you get this type of fracture a lot, but I'll show you another one that was pretty interesting. This belt made it up on my Hall of Fame here. So as you can see, every one of these teeth pretty much ripped off. And this is one of the big Panther belts. This is a very expensive belt, aftermarket belt. This was only a 100-inch RevTech that destroyed this belt, so that's kind of cool. Okay, so this is the bike. Let's get tearing into it. Take the derby cover off, the outer primary, the foot peg, shifter, the clutch, the primary chain, the compensator, undo the inner primary. We'll get that all off. This is the new S&S on these new drive belts. This is 136 tooth, 1.5 inch wide. This is a part number, you guys can see that. This is a part number if any of you guys are curious. A little expensive, but they're very good belts. I've installed a lot of these over the years. Never had an issue. Undid the shock, could easily get the drive belt over the rear pulley. That's not the problem. Herein lies the problem. As you can see, I've already got the outer primary, the clutch, the primary chain, the tensioner, the inner primary. The starter is also unbolted. That's all out of there, out of the way. This is all basically ready to put a drive belt in. The only problem is, on the FX models, like the Dynaglide, the Lowrider, there's a handful of others, the frame here goes around the swing arm bushing. This also doubles as an engine mount. Most Softails, Fat Boys, things of that nature, the motor is bolted to the frame. There's a post that goes down like this, and the motor bolts to that, and then there's a space between the engine and the transmission. These ones, in Harley's infinite wisdom and understanding of engineering, they thought it would be a great idea to bolt the transmission to the engine, and then have the swing arm bolt to the back of the transmission. As a result, it makes it incredibly difficult to change the drive belt. So this, obviously the bolts are backwards, but this is what encapsulates that rear bushing. This is a rubber bushing. And as you can see here, there's only one motor mount up on the front of the motor. So that and these bushings on either side are what hold that motor in place. So I've got the motor loose, and unfortunately, this bolt here that holds in this swing arm is incredibly hard to get out. So after these Harleys get a bit of age on them, those bushings that are in there become incredibly dry, and a lot of times the bolts seize on the shaft. So if you put an impact on there, they won't even budge. And if you put a long breaker bar in there, you're liable to break that bolt off in the swing arm. So you don't even really want to mess with that bushing unless you absolutely have to. Now we can't get the drive belt through here. There's no frame to remove. There's no easy way to really get this out of there. Now, this transmission is also an oddball. Whenever you go to service one of these things, guys, there's a drain plug. You can see it right there. There's a drain plug in the bottom of the transmission. Most transmissions that are Harley Davidson, you drain on the opposite side. And this one also has an oil filter tucked away in here, which is also an odd location for a Harley. Most Harleys drain from the clutch cover on the bottom side of the transmission, and most of the Harleys have oil filters up underneath here. So this is an oddball transmission, and it makes it incredibly hard to replace the drive belt. So what we can do here is by moving the whole rear of this machine, we can get a little bit of clearance. See that? So we've got ourselves a little bit more clearance. That also outlines, guys, how this whole assembly is tied together. Swing arm into the transmission, into the engine. So what I'm going to do, because this motor mount right here is almost coming out of the frame, I'm going to jack this up with this pry bar just enough to put this block of wood underneath my left here. So that way whenever this thing does come out of, the bushing does come out of the frame, the motor won't drop down. Almost have enough room. So I've now undone the front motor mount and the motor mount brace. This is a motor mount bolt that goes through the frame. I'm now going to slide the whole assembly this way to gain some clearance on this bushing. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this block out from the transmission and lower that down just a little bit. Now we're left with a pretty nice gap there that we're going to try to get that belt through. Alright guys, as you can see, the belt is in this little groove right here. What we're going to do, I know this is probably untraditional, but you're going to get this without taking too much time to take and unbolt the transmission or whatever else we have to do. Half the battle is just keeping your work area clean. Okay guys, that's how it's got to be done, unfortunately. A long process just for that drive belt. Let me just show you guys, now that the belt's in place, I'm going to show you guys how much this thing had to move. Okay. Now watch this bushing right here. I'm going to slide the motor. I'm going to slide the motor back. You watch that bushing. And that is how far the motor has to go to be lined back up. These are the bushing covers that cover this swing arm bushing. There's a pin here and a hollow there. Essentially just line up the pin and the bushing with a pin on the cap, and that's it. Get those bolts started. This is kind of a three-arm job sometimes to get these bushings back in place, because you're trying to pull the motor back to tighten it up, and you're also trying to lift the transmission. So this is the only thing that holds this whole engine and transmission. So these two swing arm bolts and that front motor mount that I showed you. Some of these caps here require innovative solutions to get in, so I had to use the foot peg here in the bottom of this clutch basket. See how I'm moving the whole motor so that I could get these bolts established. That way the whole thing, the whole engine and transmission and everything, the swing arm assembly, can be bolted into place. And we'll set the final torque on those. But I wanted to show you guys the whole reason why we're in here for this belt. It is finally on the vehicle. That noise you hear, this is a tin cover that someone had put on this bike. Covers this pulley. So there you are, guys. That's how you get the drive belt on your Lowrider. We've got the belt slightly tensioned just to see if it was the right length and everything, which it is. It fits perfect. So now that I've done this, I can go ahead and finish torquing the motor bolts, motor mounts in the front, and then swing arm mounts in the rear. I'll finish torquing those, and I can start putting this thing back together. There it is, guys. I've got the outer primary back on, the clutch. I got the compensator, the primary chain. I put a new starter solenoid on this for the guy because he said it was kind of hanging up a little bit. Turned it over, it works great. Got the fluid back in. Everything is all ready to rock and roll. I just wanted to show you guys, there's a mystery bolt on the inner primary. And in case anyone's doing this at home, I hope this helps you because it took me a while to find. So obviously you've got the starter bolts that you have to undo. One right there and one right underneath that oil line. Those are, you know, pretty straightforward on the Dynas. And there is also one, if you guys can see this, there is a primary bolt right there with a ground strap attached to it. And that bolt is kind of a little bit of a bugger to get out. So let's get this thing down on the ground and take it for a test spin. The best part of working on these bikes. Alright, so I'm calling that done. This thing's ready for another ride, so call the owner and have him come get it out of my hair. There you go, guys. Hopefully that video helped you. Till the next one.